wanting to have more control.
He would wake them girls up in the middle of the night waving a gun.
You need to be very scared.
I don't care. He'll have to kill me first.
You're a devil.
Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
Dads are supposed to protect their daughters. They are supposed to do anything in their power to keep them safe, healthy, and happy. They should be willing to put themselves in harm's way if it means keeping their daughters from danger. But unfortunately, not all dads are like this. Some dads, as horrific as it may be, have killed their daughters. They have taken a life that they helped to create. It's almost unimaginable how deranged and sick you would have to be to do something like this to your own child. The following stories tell the tale of 3 evil dads who killed their daughters. We have a creepy father who sexualized his own daughters, a father who is willing to annihilate his entire family for the sake of starting his life over, and a man who desired control over his daughter that he took her own life.
The Saeed sisters apparently became the innocent victims of a tragic culture clash.
The practice of arranged marriage has been around for many years and is still used by some cultures today. For many people, this practice may seem unfair and even unethical, but for others, it's something that they grew up with and expect. It involves men fighting for a certain girl they wish to marry by bidding. The father will typically choose the highest bidder. These girls are Amina and Sarah Said. They were fun and loving little girls who had a brother named Islam.
Sarah was more of the tomboy, really reserved. Amina was more of a social butterfly. She was very outspoken. She was very tomboyish too, but she also had that pretty cheek side to her.
The girls grew into normal teenagers, as you can see from this home video taken by Amina, in which she gives a tour of her bedroom.
This is my room. Well, mostly mine. It's partly Sarah's.
These beautiful girls were friends. They were well liked at school and made great grades. In fact, a lot of the time, school was all they talked about. They knew they needed to make good grades so that they could have the future of their dreams. Jason Moreno was Amina's boyfriend. He recalled the sisters' high hopes for their futures.
They had plans for themselves, that both Amina and Sarah definitely had future plans. Sarah didn't really talk too much. She was very academic. That's all she really ever talked about, that she was always talking about school.
Amina planned on having a successful career as a doctor, where she would be able to help others. Despite their plans, the girls knew that their family life might complicate things. Their parents were very different people. Their mother was a Southern Baptist, but their father, Yasser, was Muslim, who made sure that his family followed the traditions of Old Egypt. Shockingly, the girl's mother, Patricia, was just 15 when she married Yasser, who was much older than her.
When I found out she was getting married, I had a little tantrum, I told her, well, you're running your life, you're too young.
Patricia would later admit that she had a reason for getting married at such a young age.
I don't think it was love. I think it was just, we were so poor, I just wanted to get out of the house. He promised everything. Everything, your life is gonna be better.
He had a lot of land, he had all this stuff in Egypt.
Yasser had also promised Patricia that he would be able to help support her family. From the very beginning of the couple's marriage, things weren't too bad. Yasser was loving and treated Patricia with respect. But after about a year, they began to have trouble. Yasser, who was working as a taxi driver at the time, wasn't following through with the life that he had promised Patricia. He often didn't go to work, forcing Patricia to take on their financial burden by working excessively. Not only this, but he started treating her poorly.
He just started wanting to have more control, did not want me to have anything to do with my family. Those Americans, and the Americans wasn't very good.
Despite living in America, Yasser hates anything having to do with Americans. Eventually, he began to hate Patricia and told her that it was a mistake that he married her. He was terribly abusive towards her and would do things like hit her or her. Sometimes he would take all of her clothing from her dresser, dump it out on the floor, and make her clean it up while he watched. As if this alone did not make Yasser a terrible enough husband, he was also cheating on his wife.
He had 6 affairs that I know of.
He would even make Patricia pose for horrific pictures where he held a knife to her throat as a way of showing his power over her. Yasser wasn't just abusive towards Patricia, but to his own daughter.
Wow, look at his eyes.
He can be heard telling his young daughter in this disturbing home video. It was only a matter of time before the evil that was taking place in the said family household bubbled over and exploded. You can hear it play out in this horrific 911 call. Apparently, there were a lot of signs that something like this was going to happen. Yasser would frequently use his gun to terrorize the girls and get them to do what he wanted.
He would wake them girls up in the middle of the night waving a gun, threatening them that they were going to do what he says, or he was killing them.
Yasser was both physically and sexually abusive to the young girls, something that Amina would confide in to friends and family members. He would hit them, kick them, he would call them horrible names. After learning of this sexual abuse, Patricia took her children and moved out of the house. They went to the police where the girls detailed how they had been abused. Strangely, they ended up taking back their statements. Ultimately, the charges against Yasser were dropped. Amina would later confess to family members that her parents had forced them to say that, and they had made it all up.
Yasser and her made the kids recant their story and say that it didn't happen to keep him out of jail.
Yasser could now do whatever he wanted to the girls, including abusing them sexually. It got to the point where they would sleep with jeans on in order to make it harder for him to take advantage of them.
Don't even think about it.
Says one of the girls laying in bed with her pants on. And it gets even creepier as the video goes on, and Yasser can be heard complimenting his young daughter's body.
Nice legs.
Zooming in on his daughter's bare feet sticking out from under the blanket. The girls are clearly uncomfortable and try to cover up their bodies as best they can. The girls, even though they were young, still knew that what was going on was very wrong.
Get out! I'm erasing this tape.
No, you can't.
Yes, I will. This is illegal. Do I better tape you when you're sleeping?
And then, after Yasser made a creepy remark about Amina's eyes, she responded,
I'm gonna get sick now. Okay, turn it off, Dad.
Before the girls were even old enough to know what their plans were for college, Yasser was obsessed with getting arranged marriages set up for them. He even took Amina over to Egypt with him, where he tried to set her up with a 47-year-old man. Amina refused. What Yasser didn't know was that Amina had a boyfriend that she was keeping a secret. Amina told her boyfriend about her father's plans to force her into an arranged marriage. His mother, Ruth, would later learn of what was going on.
She told my son that her father had plans for both girls once they graduated to be in a forced marriage. And that's why they were going to Egypt during the summers, because he was introducing her to men that, I guess, potential suitors.
But an arranged marriage was not what Sarah nor Amina were interested in. They wanted to grow up, go to school, fall in love, and then get married when the time was right. And they were married. They longed to be treated like their brother Islam, who was not subjected to the same control that they were.
Yasser treated Islam a lot different from what I've been told. The boys in the Muslim family are very respected.
Yasser obsessively kept watch over the girls, even using cameras and telescopes to spy on them in order to make sure they weren't talking to guys and were behaving as he desired.
As they got older, I believe that, as kids get older, you start to lose a little bit of that control, and I don't think he liked that.
Yasser was totally obsessed with knowing what his girls were doing and who they were talking to at all times. He would bug their computers and cell phones to find out who they were talking to and whether the person was male or female. He started to get even more crazy when the girls took part-time jobs at a local store. In this video, you can see Sarah working as a clerk at a grocery store while Yasser videotapes her from afar. He brought Amina along with them.
She smiled to the customers.
Bubba, she has to. Part of her job.
She's in trouble.
It didn't matter what the girls were doing or where it was. Their father was always watching. As you can probably imagine, it would only be a matter of time before Yasser would find out that Amina had a boyfriend that she had been hiding from him. This was a man who treated her right and gave her the respect that she had never received before.
We both felt like what we had was very real, and it was very much worth fighting for.
It was much like the story of Romeo and Juliet. Amina knew that her love for her boyfriend might result in her death at the hands of her father, but she refused to give it up. To her, it was worth dying for. And, unfortunately, that she did. While Amina and Sarah were in their father's taxi cab, he shot them both in a fit of rage after having learned of Amina's romance.
It was hard, to say the least.
Joseph and Amina first met through a martial arts class. They saw each other nearly every day. They went from liking each other a lot to loving one another, and before long they had been keeping their relationship under wraps from her father for 4 years. Meanwhile, Joseph's family knew Amina well. His mother in particular loved her very much.
First of all, she was strikingly beautiful. She had these amazing, beautiful green eyes and a smile. I mean, to know her was just to fall in love with her.
Amina lived in constant fear of her father finding out about Joseph. She had to save his number under a different name in her phone and would sometimes even have to use a secret phone to contact him. She believed that not only her father, but some of her extended family members could possibly harm Joseph and his family if they found out about her relationship. She showed a picture of her family to his mother to help her to know who to be on the lookout for.
She said, if you ever see any of these people around your house or around you or Joseph, you need to be very scared and you need to try to get to the police.
Joseph was so desperate to make sure that Amina was safe and get her out of her toxic home life that he began to plan for them to elope. It would be one quick trip to Vegas, they would get married, and everything would be solved. Unfortunately, they would never get to make that trip. That was because Yasser caught Amina in the middle of writing her boyfriend a love letter. Yasser began beating his daughter savagely, demanding that she tell him who Joseph was and where he lived, but she refused. She knew that if she did, her father would kill her boyfriend. In a desperate attempt to make sure that his daughter never spoke to Joseph again, Yasser would abruptly end up moving his entire family to a new town 20 miles away.
She was just gone, and I had no idea like what happened. She literally just I went from talking to her hours a day, every day, to just nothing. She was just gone.
Around the time that Yasser had moved and his family away after finding out about Amina's relationship, Amina knew that she was probably going to die. She even considered taking her own life before her father could do it.
I don't care. He'll have to kill me first. I'd rather die than live without you. One day, we'll be married and happy.
Amina was disgusted by her father's plans for her and her sister. She knew that he was planning on selling both of them against their will in Egypt.
And he's gonna take me over there and let some guy choose me like I'm a freaking object.
Eventually, the girls and even their mother, Patricia, decided that enough was enough. They ended up getting into the car and fleeing to Oklahoma. It wasn't until they got there that Amina phoned Joseph to tell him what was going on. Meanwhile, Yasser realized that the girls had fled pretty quickly and ended up pinging their phones to determine their location. He blew up Patricia's phone with calls and texts, begging her to come back home. By the time the holiday season rolled around, Patricia convinced her girls to return back home to Texas to visit some of their family members. What they didn't realize until it was too late was that she was bringing them back to their father. Jojo, Mom tricked us. She went back. I'm so scared, Amina wrote to Joseph in a text message. When the girls get back home, their father persuades them to get into his taxi cab. He claims that he just wants to take them out to dinner. We know that his intentions were much more sinister.
What's going on, man?
I'm dying, that's what's up.
Sarah was shot multiple times and still managed to call 911 during that tragic taxi ride before she and Amina both succumbed to their injuries. Sarah and Amina were killed in 2008, but Yasser would not be captured until August of 2020. He was on the FBI's most wanted list for an extended period of time, and a $100,000 reward was posted for information regarding his arrest. He was charged with his daughter's murders, which he pled not guilty to. The case went to trial, and the jury did not believe Yasser's plea of innocence.
A jury handed down a guilty verdict to the father who murdered his 2 teenage daughters and then spent more than a decade on the run.
It took 3 hours for the jury to reach their decision. When the verdict was finally read and Yasser was sentenced to life in prison, he showed no emotion. Patricia took the stand upon Yasser's sentencing to get the final word, not only for herself but for her daughters. She held up 2 photographs, one of Amina and one of Sarah, during her statement.
Yasser Saeed, you're a devil. You murdered your girls. And I'm gonna say this. I hope somebody gets their hands on you and hurt you and do everything you ever done to anybody.
For now, Yasser remains behind bars. May Sarah and Amina's bright and beautiful souls be remembered forever.
Like, I have no inclination to where they're at right now. It's like a nightmare that I just can't wake up from. Like, I want her back so bad. I want those kids back so bad.
Said Chris Watts, a strange smile upon his face as he spoke to a local Colorado news station, imploring the public for help in finding his beloved wife and children. This is the story of one of the most famous and horrific family members that the world has ever known. It is the disturbing and demonic story of the Watts family murders. Shannon Watts believed that she had a near to perfect life. She loved to document her life on Facebook.
Hey guys, we're here from the boat today.
She said in one post, smiling ear to ear. Her beloved husband, Chris, could be seen following behind her. Shannon was very much beloved by her parents, Frank and Sandra.
She was fun, full of life. She did so many things. She had her hand in everything. She was amazing.
Because social media was part of her career, Shannon shared a lot of her personal life online. For the most part, she only shared the good parts, herself cooking, parenting her children, and sometimes doing her skincare. She had 2 adorable little girls, Cece and Bella. She was married to a man named Chris Watts. Chris worked at a local oil plant and had met Shannon through Facebook.
I got a friend request from Chris on Facebook. Well, one thing led to another, and he's the best thing that has ever happened to me.
Shannon absolutely believed that Chris was the man of her dreams. He treated her well and was conscious of the fact that she suffered from a sometimes debilitating disease called lupus. Her family truly believed that she had been sent to him by God. Eventually, when the girls were still quite young, Shannon found out she was pregnant with a 3rd child. She ended up confiding in her online friends regarding her pregnancy.
Got a doctor appointment in 2 hours. I know, boy, Chris wants a boy. I hope it's a boy for him. It'll make him happy.
And sure enough, she was pregnant with a boy. As soon as she found out, she decided on a name for the little guy, Nico, a tribute to her Italian heritage. From any of the pictures and videos that Shannon had posted online, Chris appears to be a great dad. He reads to the children, helps her prepare meals, and much more. She had no idea who she really married. Shannon's journey for physical wellness and relief from lupus, a disease she had long suffered with, pushed her to continue her passion for her career, which involved selling health products, including vitamin-infused patches.
I'm very determined, and I am going to be extremely successful.
Shannon would work for many hours a day, and as a result, she got treated to lots of fun vacations around the country. Most of the time she would bring Chris, and he got to join her for many cool experiences. Chris Watts appeared to be quite knowledgeable in how relationships were meant to go. Here you see him doing an actual tutorial on how to have a relationship. But was he really as good of a partner and father that he seemed on the outside? It was around 6 years after Chris filmed that tutorial that he met a woman named Nicole Kessinger and began an affair with her. The pair worked together, and initially Nicole was under the impression that Chris was single. Meanwhile, while this affair is going on, Shannon remains dedicated to her life with Chris. She's excited for the new addition in their family, baby Nico. She was very excited to tell Chris about her pregnancy, as you can see in this clip, as she wears a t-shirt with the words, "Oops, we did it again." But Chris didn't want another baby, and he didn't want the responsibility of having a family. That's what attracted him to Nicole. She wasn't tied down. While Shannon carried the couple's newborn baby, Nicole and Chris were out having adventures of their own, taking hikes and visiting waterfalls. Chris had longed for these adventures after having gotten tired of the monotony of taking care of his family. Chris and Nicole communicate nonstop. He even texts her when he's at home with Shannon and the girls. Shannon knows that something is going on, but she doesn't know that it's infidelity. Chris seems disinterested in her and disconnected. She thinks that if she gives Chris some space, that it'll help fix their relationship. So she takes the girls to go spend the summer in a different state with her parents. Now that Shannon is miles away, Chris starts dating Nicole out in the open. He doesn't have to sneak around anymore. He can take her out for dates. He's fully invested in their relationship. He's incredibly attracted to her and even takes pictures of her scantily clad in a bikini, which he saves on his phone. He doesn't give a second thought to Shannon, Bella, or Cece. Chris is totally infatuated with Nicole, even addicted, you might say. He even Googles things like,
what does it feel like when someone says, I love you?
Meanwhile, in North Carolina with the girls, Shannon is starting to suspect that something is going on back home. Chris takes forever to respond to her text messages, if he even responds at all. You okay? It's like you don't want to talk. I keep trying to talk and I had to dig it out of you. Chris assures her that everything is fine, and he's just been busy with work. In another heartbreaking text sent July 10th of 2019, Shannon wrote, I miss you. I wish my husband would talk to me. When Shannon and the girls do end up coming back home, she hopes that things will go back to normal and Chris will be the attentive and affectionate dad again like he used to be. But things are even worse than before, and he only ignores her. 5 weeks away from me and not touching me. Doesn't make me feel good. He got me pregnant. I just want to cry. She writes in a message to a friend. Even worse, Chris seems totally uninterested in the fact that they're having another child. Shannon tried to fix things and was still invested in her marriage. She wanted to try couples counseling to work through their problems, but Chris wasn't open to this. Then came August of 2018. Shannon had to leave to go on a trip for work. It was decided that she would go with just her friend Nicole, while Chris and the girls stayed home. After they returned from their trip, Nicole ended up dropping Shannon off at home at around 1:45 in the morning. What Nicole didn't realize was, at the time, this would be the last she would ever hear from her best friend.
I just told her, if you need help in the morning, let me know.
She had said this because she knew Shannon had a doctor's appointment in the morning that was for her unborn son. The two women shared a hug before going their separate ways, and Nicole returned to her home down the street. It wasn't until the next morning that Nicole had a feeling that something was wrong. Shannon wasn't answering calls or text messages. She wouldn't come to the door, even though Nicole could see the car was still there. In a panic, she called 911, and the officers came out to the house. They ended up making entry into the home.
Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
A short while later, Chris arrives at the home. He claims he doesn't know where his wife or girls could have gone. They walk through the house and find things that Shannon wouldn't have left behind, like her cell phone and the girls' blankets. They end up going to a neighbor's house. The neighbor has a security camera that shows the Watts house. It doesn't show her leaving with the girls, but it does show him backing out the truck the night before. People around the nation are tuning into this investigation, desperate to bring this pregnant mother and her children home. Chris says he wants his girls home, but he shows no emotion. He doesn't cry or even seem worried.
It's just earth-shattering. I don't feel like this is even real right now.
Police bring Chris in for questioning. They know a lot more than he would have expected. They know about his affair with Nicole. He claims he never cheated on his wife, but investigators don't believe it for a minute.
I think that sounds ridiculous.
Chris also promises that he would never have hurt his family. This is another thing police don't buy.
Nothing you told me tonight makes sense.
It takes hours of questioning and getting through Chris's lies to try to get through the truth.
The issue right now is what happened to Shan, Bella, and Celeste.
Finally, Chris admits that he did in fact kill his wife and children, and he tells police where he buried them. Police follow Chris's instructions and manage to recover the bodies of Shannon, Bella, and Celeste at his job site. He's arrested and charged with their murders. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. His case sent shockwaves around the entire nation.
These kids who looked up to you and expected you to be their daddy, that's the ultimate betrayal of trust.
Shannon, her unborn son, and her daughters were laid to rest together.
Tonight, Joshua Burgess sits on close watch in a jail cell here at the Union County Jail. He is charged with murder in a case that investigators describe as chilling.
The girl in this picture is beautiful Zaria Burgess, a 15-year-old with her whole life ahead of her.
This is just a case where it's just pure evil.
Zaria's young life was cut short in 2019 during a visit to her dad's house. She died at the hands of her own father, the man in this photo.
Still can't believe what happened, you know?
But Zaria wasn't just murdered. She was horrifically tortured, sexually abused, and psychologically abused for almost 24 hours by her father. He then cut her throat. The horrific scene played out in this house in North Carolina. Later, Joshua would confess all the awful things he did to poor defenseless Zaria.
He, readily admitted what had transpired.
Joshua ended up walking into the sheriff's office and giving them his name. They only began to look him up in their system to find out what he was charged with, only for him to stop them.
He stopped her and said, "You're not going to find anything. I've just killed someone."
Joshua then led police to where it all went down. Nearby neighbors were shocked. They would never have expected something like that to happen in their town, much less that Joshua would be the one to do it.
Just crazy, and how sad and tragic that is.
Zaria's death devastated her family and friends.
She was just the type of kid that would come in the room or come in the house and say, "Hey, everybody," just wanting to make everybody feel good.
Zaria never had the chance to attend high school because she was killed just weeks before her freshman year.
But she was so young, and nobody deserves to leave this world like that, especially by someone they thought that was going to protect them and be there for them.
Joshua reportedly showed little emotion during his first appearance in court.
And in court, Burgess kept his head very low. It was hard to see his facial expressions. He made very little eye contact.
It's unclear where Joshua ever felt remorse for the horrific, unthinkable things he did to young Zaria. You're probably wondering why. Why would someone do this to someone he supposedly loved? As for Joshua's motive, police believe it was fueled by lust towards his daughter and a need to control her. In June of 2020, Joshua would finally have to pay for what he did to his young daughter. After a 3-week trial, the jury would ultimately sentence him to death. He remains on death row. May Zaria's beautiful light be remembered forever.
My mother had the most beautiful teeth. Her teeth are my first memory. I remember them, long and white, and bared in a ferocious grin, shining under the full moon as she told me a story. Not a fairy tale or a picture book, but my story. The story of how I'd come to her. Or rather, how she'd come to me. When I was very small, too small to remember anything at all, My mother stole me from a man and took me to live in the forest. She stole me not as an act of love, but as an act of revenge. Though I was desperate to know, she never told me what needed avenging. One night, I finally asked, "Why won't you tell me?"
"Because you are my baby,"
she whispered in her low, wet voice. She stroked my face with long fingers. Her teeth glittered under the stars, rich and pale as polished ivory.
"My baby will never hear, or see, or know the cruelties that haunt me."
Cruelty was not the only thing my mother knew that I did not, although it was the only thing she refused to teach me. My mother tried very hard to teach me everything else she knew. Unfortunately, I was a very poor pupil indeed. My mother was a remarkable huntress. She felled elk and bear effortlessly. Sometimes she slid into the lake without so much as a ripple and returned hours later with a monstrous fish clamped in her jaws. Because hunting came so easily to her, Mother expected me to learn quickly.
"Men hunt,"
she hissed.
"They have always hunted. So shall you."
But I could not hunt. Not like her. My soft, small fingers were no match for her lethal claws. My clumsy little body, somehow so susceptible to both heat and cold, trailed after her whip-like predator's form. Mother caught deer and foxes with her beautiful teeth, striking from the shadows like a snake. By contrast, my dull teeth could not even crush rabbit bones. I persevered, but did not improve. One night, while Mother snaked through the shadows, communing with trees and evading the dark things prowling the night, I curled up and wept. She found me that way, weak and weeping. I covered my eyes and held my breath. I knew it was useless. Mother could hear my heartbeat from the other side of the hill, so surely she knew I was crying, but that small scrap of pride was all I had. Mother stood there for a long while. Then she crept forward and covered me with fresh leaves before lying beside me.
"I will feed you always,"
she whispered.
"Because you are my baby."
In addition to hunting, my mother was a phenomenal creator of shelters. Sometimes she lived within the earth, snaking through loam and tree roots, like treasure-hoarding dragons of old. Sometimes she lived in the trees. Many nights I watched in awe as her bones elongated and tore through her rough skin, stretching upward to twist among the branches like an ancient spider god. I would wait patiently, sometimes for hours, as Mother communed with the spirits buried in the roots. Sometimes she lived in the shadows, creeping through the darkness to flush out food and threat alike. So, Mother tried to teach me to dig burrows, but I could not dig like her. I was too small and too soft and far too frightened of bugs and moles that tunneled through the earth. So she tried to teach me to live along the tree branches, to rest and listen as the redwoods murmured the long, strange histories of the earth. But my bones could not stretch like Mother's. I could not twist my arms to match the branches. My skin could not interlock with the tree bark, and my blood was too sluggish to melt into the sap. So Mother tried to teach me to live in the shadows. But the darkness terrified me. Every night I hid and wept, imagining the legs of centipedes crawling along my skin. All the night creatures reveled in my fear. Owls swooped down to taunt me, and bats torpedoed toward me, giggling in their shrill, squeaking voices until Mother slapped them out of the sky. Finally, Mother realized the futility of these lessons, so she dug a deep burrow just for me. She lined it with leaves and slurped the worms and roaches from the walls. When she finished, I burst into tears.
"Why do you weep?"
she rasped. "Because you do everything for me." I knew the laws of forest creatures and their young that were weak were killed in the nest. Young that could not learn to fend for themselves were abandoned to die. I was weak and soft and coated in terrible, ugly scars. "Why do you do everything for me?" Mother snaked forward, long, large hands sinking into the earth. She curled around me and pulled me close.
"Because you are my baby."
Mother did not always live in the burrow with me. She roamed the mountains. She burrowed with moles, slithered with snakes, and grazed with elk, hunted with wolves, and stood with trees. When I was very small, I thought she ate the forest, but it was not that simple. She protected it, and in return, it sustained her.
My heart,
She told me one rainy night.
is the forest, so this is how it must be.
As I grew older, I developed rudimentary survival skills. I shied away from hunting big game, elk and deer, bears and boar, because I did not protect the forest. I gave it nothing, I only took. So I took as little as I could. I trapped rabbits, fished the streams, and ate the wild berries. I dared take nothing else. Once I could reliably feed myself, Mother stayed away for long stretches. Hours, then days, and then finally weeks. I missed her terribly, with a deep, panicky ache. I confronted her about it one balmy spring evening. "You leave me more and more," I accused. "Soon you'll leave me forever."
Never.
She murmured. A breeze twined around us, raising goose flesh on my skin and rippling her long white hair.
I will never leave you.
"But you do!" I screamed. "You already do!"
Before you came, I lived among the trees, listened to their warnings. I slept in the warm earth as worms and centipedes nibbled my skin. I spent many of your lifetimes within the forest, little one. So many lives at a time that I forgot my own name. I do not leave you. I have left the forest for you.
"I didn't come here," I sobbed. "You took me."
I did. So I will never leave you. When you think I've left, silence yourself and listen. Listen for me the way I listen for the trees, the animals, the stars. If you are silent and you are sincere, you will hear me.
And then she left. Fury and jealousy seared my heart like a wildfire. She insulted me, she humiliated me, and after all that, she left me. Left me for centipedes and wolves and those stupid, chittering bats. "I don't need you!" An owl hooted angrily in response. "I don't need you at all!" Then I ran from my burrow. As the earthen door materialized before me, nodding with flowers and wild grasses, anger swelled inside of me. It possessed me. This wild ball of misery born of my own endless fear and inadequacy. It spoke to me. "Why should you return to the burrow?" it asked. Why indeed? It wasn't mine. It was Mother's. The entire forest belonged to Mother. Without her, the forest would have consumed me long ago. So I turned away from the burrow and kept running. "I'll find the end of the forest," I decided. "I will leave it once and for all." I ran for days, in the process treating the forest with contempt. I stripped the trees of their leaves to make nightly beds. I threw rocks at birds and rabbits. I uprooted bushes and stripped entire groves of their berries, eating until I threw up from sheer excess. And then I ate again. Not out of hunger, not out of any need, but out of malice. And one day, long after spring faded into summer, in a verdant explosion of heat and greenery, I heard voices. I froze immediately. The only voice I knew was Mother's. Wet and low and earthy, rib-shaking whisper. These voices were nothing like Mother's. They were high and somehow infantile, with strange, shrill notes. These voices were like mine. Trembling, I dropped low and crept through the underbrush. Sun-warmed leaves brushed against my face, smooth but painfully crisp. The sun was taking its toll on them. I snaked over the ground, pretending I was Mother, slipping through the forest like an invisible snake. I reached a break in the trees and peered through. In a small clearing were 4 creatures. They had pale skin and wore heavy clothing that looked suffocating. Their hands were small and soft, their faces were smooth and baby-like, somehow half-formed, wide-eyed and rounded, with soft noses and plump flesh. I touched my face, flat and smooth, and looked down at myself, mud-streaked, deeply tanned, and marked with a hideous mass of scars, but still soft, hairless, small, weak. There was no mistaking it. These things in the woods, these overdressed, half-formed beings with small teeth, no claws, and overlarge eyes, were like me. They were men. I stood up, propelled by panicking excitement, and strode forward. All at once they froze. "What the hell?" one whispered. He lifted something in his arms and pointed it at me. It was long and strange to me. Inorganic, not alive, with a wooden handle and a gleaming tube. Just then, I realized something. The forest was silent. A few birds chirped and sang. A few bugs emitted their persistent drones. But the vast majority, birds, insects, trees, were silent. No rabbits, no deer, certainly no bears. These things, these creatures like me, these men, had silenced the earth. They'd stolen the forest from itself. We stared at each other for a long time as the ever-growing summer heat filled the clearing like an invisible pool. "Mother," I whispered. "Mother, please help me." She did not, so I turned and ran. The men immediately pursued. I could hear them yelling, crushing the undergrowth, stamping on blossoms and bugs, snapping branches as they ran. The forest's deathly silence was worse than any cry.
"There it is!"
one of them screamed. A second later, the forest exploded. A deafening boom shook the trees and ate through the air as pain erupted at my shoulder. I didn't dare stop or look. I pressed on, running and crying as the men came after me. The forest seemed to punish me for my earlier cruelty. Brambles scratched my legs and steps cut my feet. Branches swiped at my face, leaving deep, stinging runnels. I thanked the forest for its kindness. I thanked it for punishing me, rather than stopping me. The men gasped and wailed amongst themselves.
"What the hell is it? I don't know. Is it a kid? Look at its face. Look at its fucking face. That isn't a kid."
Something suddenly filled my ears, drowning the sounds of the men in the forest. A deep, musical rushing, like birdsong, transformed into a turbulent river. And then Mother came, erupting from the trees like a great beast of old. But that's what she was. A great beast. Surely a daemon of the ancient world. She pounced upon them. She clamped one between her claws, squeezing until his head separated and went rolling across the ground. One by one, Mother caught and tore them, shredding them the way she shredded leaves for my bedding. Blood streaked the forest, turning the dirt to mud and dripping from the trees like sluggish rain. Mother dug her claws into the skull of the last survivor and cracked it open like a fruit. Blood and gray brain glistened in the sunlight. The man screamed and screamed and screamed. Mother leaned down and extended her tongue. It curled outward, pale and orange gold like sunrise on a cold, clear morning, and delicately slipped his brains, curl by curl, like so many worms from my burrow walls. By the time he stopped screaming, the forest had returned to its loud, familiar glory, murmuring trees, singing birds, and skittering insects, grazing deer. I smiled and ran to Mother. She reared up and screamed.
"See what you've done?"
Terror paralyzed me. I looked helplessly at her blazing eyes, contorted face, runneled with earth and wild flowers, sun-bleached bone and pale, spongy rot. My mother, my beautiful daemon mother who claimed me out of revenge and raised me out of obligation, staring at me like I was a man.
"When you stone a bird, my heart stops. When you break a branch, my bones snap. When you selfishly strip the shrubs of their fruit, of their very birthright, my skin blisters. When you hurt the forest,"
she roared,
"my heart bleeds."
I fell to my knees and hid my face. Mother rushed forward on her many limbs and wrapped long fingers around my throat. She lifted me up, dangling me over the forest floor.
"I killed men for you. Now more will come. They will trample. They will cut. They will burn. They will kill. They will kill the bears and the cougars and the wolves, for they will blame the predators for what I've done to you. Do you see?"
"Yes, Mother, I see."
She dropped me. I hit the ground with such force it knocked the wind out of me. Mother pulled back and busied herself with one of the corpses. I looked up, shaking. Birds watched from the trees, quick and curious, full of condemnation. I averted my eyes as tears spilled. Mother returned to me. She extended an arm and opened her hand. Upon her large palm were 4 eyes and a large, glistening heart. I stared at them blankly, and then looked up at her.
4 eyes, 1 from each man, and the heart of the one that shot you. Eat,
she said. My lips quivered. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the gore in my mother's hand. A heart and eyes, raw and plump, alive just minutes ago. Mother, I said, please.
Are you of me, or are you of man?
The forest became painfully silent. The animals, the trees, and the insects, all waiting with bated breath. I am of you, Mother. I plucked the first eye from her palm. It was round and curiously firm, with a sort of firm, watery texture. I associated it with rotten fruits. The pink, wormy optic nerve dangled. For a terrible moment, I thought I would vomit. Then I raised it to my lips and bit in. The eyes were awful. The heart was even worse. Thick and almost impossible to chew. Mother had to tear it for me, slicing it into manageable pieces with her beautiful teeth. When I finished, Mother picked me up, holding me tightly, streaked back to the burrow as night fell. That night I became ill. I shook and shivered and hallucinated for days. My mind bled with images of dangling eyes and glistening hearts and skulls cracked apart like pomegranates. Mother lay with me all the while, soothing me with ancient songs like bird songs turned to rivers, and cooling me with her damp, earthy breath. Finally, the fever broke. I sat up, gasping as the last vestiges of my nightmare drifted away. Mother sat across the burrow, hunched over tiredly.
You are well. I am glad, for I must leave.
I blinked tiredly. Why?
Men.
She said. But you killed them.
There are more. They creep into the forest searching for their dead brethren. They are cutting the trees and crushing the flowers and killing the bears, my little one. If I don't stop them, they will even come for you. I have to stop them. My heart is the forest and so are you. I must protect both.
A lump rose in my throat. Shame, like I'd never known, enveloped me. I'm so sorry.
You are my baby. Babies must learn. By learning, they grow.
Mother, am I truly of man? Mother closed her eyes. For a long time, she did not speak. She then drew a deep breath.
I took you from a cruel man. Listen, I will tell you now of the cruelties I endured.
I listened, enraptured and horrified as she spun her sorry tale. Mother was once a young, beautiful human woman. Surely not more beautiful than you are now, I objected.
Listen,
she said. Mother was alone in the world. She had no family or friends. She once had a family, but they harmed her greatly, so she ran away. She lived in the forest, in a small, ragged tent. She ate wild berries, fished the lake, and boiled water to drink. Laws are strange things. Though Mother hurt nothing and no one, she was breaking the law by living in the forest. She was found and caught and imprisoned, separated from the trees and the birds. Mother faded quickly. Though she was only jailed for a short while, it nearly killed her. The day she was released was the best day of her life. Or so she thought. No sooner had Mother gathered her meager belongings and exited the jail than a guard came up beside her. Where are you headed to? He asked. I'll take you wherever you want to go. Mother was ecstatic.
Take me back to the forest,
she said. The guard obliged, driving her toward the woods. Except he stopped too soon. He stopped at a house. His house, it turned out. The guard was a terrible man. He trapped Mother. He hurt her. He tortured her, abused her in every way. He cut her open and burned her. He snapped her bones. And he put a baby in her. Mother was so broken that he missed all the signs of impending childbirth. When I came, Mother died.
He dumped me in a vat of acid and scattered my liquid remains among the trees. But then, I heard you.
Mother told me. Mother smiled faintly. Crumbles of dirt and root fell from her face.
I heard your cry. Your need for me.
I don't understand what Mother said next. It is difficult to translate, but the closest I can come is this. Everyone sings a song to those they love. Most aren't able to hear these songs. If you can't hear, it can't help you. But if you can hear it, a song is the most powerful thing in the world. It kills, it calls, it consumes, it destroys, it strengthens, and sometimes it resurrects.
When I reformed and breathed again, I stole you from your father.
Mother said.
Then I brought you here, because you are my baby.
I wept silently because I didn't know what to say.
I must go,
she said.
The trees and the animals need me now. So remember, little one, when you are silent and you are sincere, you will hear me.
Then she whipped around like a wolf, a snake, and a hawk combined, and left. She did not return. At first I thought nothing of it. I had made a terrible mess. I had summoned men. I'd caused the forest to bleed. Mother had a great deal of work ahead of her. But summer slowly bled into fall, and still Mother did not return. When the first snow came, dry and cold, skittering across the landscapes like powder, I knew something was wrong. The forest drifted into its winter sleep, cloaked in ice and fog. Every night I made myself silent. I mustered all the sincerity I could, and I listened for my mother's voice. It did not come. I grew thin and sick. My skin burned even as I shivered. My chest grew congested, my throat so sore I couldn't sleep. My breath came in sharp pain wheezes. Soon, I became too weak to leave the burrow. I crawled to the doorway and ate snow. For sustenance, I slurped worms from the earthen walls. It was not enough. I knew it. Only then, in the quiet and peace and fear of approaching death, did I become truly silent. Only then did I hear the voice of my mother. I heard her in my dreams. The low, rushing voice like music made into water.
I am coming. I am coming because you are my baby.
I smiled and slept. Next thing I knew, I was cold and wet, shivering, but awake. I shot up and screamed as my skin brushed the thick, flour-matted hide of my mother. I spun around, smiling, and froze. Mother lay beside me, panting. Blood seeped from 100 wounds, crusting her hair. The exposed bones in her hair were crushed and concave, leaking gore and blood. Without opening her eyes, she smiled.
I heard you. I heard your song.
Tears blurred my vision. My chest began to hitch. I couldn't draw breath. It was like I was sick again, drowning in pus and trapped fluid. Only I wasn't dying this time. My mother was. Then stay, I said. You have to stay because you can hear my song.
No. You needed to see me again, but you do not need me.
I need you, Mama. I need you.
No. I killed all who would harm you.
But what about the forest? The forest will kill me without you. She chuckled. Her breath came terribly fast and increasingly weak.
You are of me. Remember, you are of me. You are my baby.
My mother, my beautiful, ancient mother, drew a shallow breath and lay still. I lay beside her for many days, and then, when she began to stink, I left. A hiker eventually found me, a stupid, solitary hiker with a soft heart and a great deal of patience and no fear. When I learned to speak the words of men, the authorities lost no time in telling me that Mother wasn't really my mother. They discovered my identity, at least in a manner of speaking, through DNA. My real mother, they say, was a vagrant, a Jane Doe who lived in a tent in the national park. She was alone and defenseless, two things that attract human monsters. After a brief stint in jail for loitering, my mother ended up kidnapped, imprisoned, and tortured by an as yet unidentified assailant who eventually tried unsuccessfully to dissolve her in acid. They think he attempted to dissolve my body too. That's why I'm covered in scars. It is why I frightened those hunters so long ago. The acid burns make me look like a monster to men. Since my real mother apparently died long ago, they decided that Mother, whoever she was nothing but a crazy homeless child abuser. But I know better. Even so, I adapted. I had no choice. I am of my mother, but I live among men. That's what animals must do. Their young learn, and grow, and adapt. If they don't, they die. But I am not adapting anymore. At least, I'm not adapting to live among men. My mouth is changing in ways that are terrible to people, but wonderful to me. It's my teeth, you see. I'm growing my mother's beautiful teeth. Looking at my teeth in the mirror, it was frightening and electrifying. Joy and terror ran through my veins in equal measure. It had to mean something. So I fell asleep. I became sincere. I listened, and I heard. I heard the voice of my mother. Low and rushing, like bird song turned to a wild river. She tells me I do not belong with men, because I am her heart, and her heart is the forest. She tells me I must return, and she tells me she is waiting for me, because I am her baby.